Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of your Hope Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm really glad that you've joined us for yet another episode in what I've called the Sacred Scar Story series. We've got a story that's going to encourage your heart today. I know because Jesus says, in this world, you will have trouble. I know you've gone through some things that are hard and painful. And maybe you've gone through some things that you thought, wow, this is not how I thought life would turn out. Or how could this be good? Or how could God bring good from this? We all know Romans 8:28, and God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So as you listen in on this episode today, I'm wondering, what is your thing? What is your pain point that you're struggling with now? Maybe it's something that occurred in the past and you've kept it locked up in closet of your heart. Maybe it's time to see that God really can heal and redeem in those areas that we think are so shameful, so embarrassing, so guilt-ridden that we wouldn't want anyone to know. My guest today is Julie Sunne, who writes about finding real hope amid life's real struggles. Her own struggles include enduring multiple miscarriages and caregiving for her adult daughter who has significant intellectual disabilities. Julie's writing has been featured in print devotionals for several online sites, and Julie and her husband David are parents to three grown sons and a daughter and reside with their daughter in rural Northeast Iowa. She's new to the program, so would you give a warm, hope-filled perspective welcome to Julie?
Thank you, Michelle. So fun to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here, and we're going to have you back so that we can talk about your new book. Sometimes I forget, but I wanted to have you on the program because I know that you've got a story, a wound, a pain, something you've gone through that you've
Yeah.
seen God bring good out of. And in the 5 years of interviewing people for this podcast and the 30 years of interviewing people in my private practice, I know that frequently some of our greatest areas of ministry come out of our greatest areas of pain. So, will you share what significant events or experiences have happened to you that wounded you either physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually? What has God brought you through?
Wow, that's a loaded question. There's so much that God has allowed in my life that I would call wounded wounds.
Mhm.
And I guess to kind of put it in broad perspective, within 8 years, as a young wife, I experienced five miscarriages and gave birth to four children, two of which had disabilities. My oldest son was born with a disabled arm that we weren't sure what was causing it or what that would look like in the end. And then my daughter, our only daughter, and our third child was born with, at the time we did not know it, but significant intellectual disabilities and some other disabilities as well. And and then later our another son also was diagnosed with some learning disabilities. So kind of been through that. And our first pregnancy ended in miscarriage, which kind of began that roller coaster of, I guess, motherhood for
Yeah.
me.
So parenting for you was not textbook. It didn't look like all the movies make it look like this picture perfect, happy life
No,
without complication.
no. And I certainly expected to be textbook. I think we often go into marriage and life with kind of rosy expectations, and especially with the way I thought of God at the time, and the way I viewed God, I was really expecting, because I felt I was a good person, and I really expected to have a good life, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And miscarriage didn't fit into that
Oh, for sure.
definition of good.
I can relate to that one for sure.
Yeah.
We have this naive perspective, especially when we're young,
Mhm.
that, if we do good for God, then God will bless us. And it's not that he doesn't bless us, but I think sometimes we're looking for him to bless us in a certain way. And it
Exactly.
doesn't always look like that. In fact, I was reading a passage in your book about that last night. In what way did this experience, this wound, if you will, either hold you back or perhaps cause you to experience shame or fear or even just limit you from walking in freedom?
Yeah. Well, it really caused me at the time to turn away from the source of all freedom. I was very angry, and that anger and bitterness really kind of captured me and brought me to a very dark place. And so I didn't have peace. I didn't have joy. I didn't know the freedom that Christ would give me. I was a Christian, but I was not walking in the freedom that Christ offers.
Mhm.
And so it was very much a bondage. My emotions were all over the place. I was susceptible to my circumstances. That's what was driving my emotions. And when I gave birth to a baby, I was on top of the world. And when something else happened, or the next miscarriage rolled around, or something else happened, I was plummeting. And that's kind of how my faith went. I loved the Lord, and was singing his praises, I suppose, when I had that child. And then the next time I had a miscarriage, I was angry again, and bitter, and turning my back. And so I was a very fickle follower, I guess you could say.
I think he's used to that.
I
There's
think
a lot
so.
of us like that.
I think so. And he is a big God and can handle so much. And he does. He's so gracious.
Out of curiosity, where did you direct your anger? Did you direct it towards God or towards your husband or towards other women who seem to get pregnant and their babies turned out, picture perfect, no miscarriages? Did you direct your anger towards yourself? How did that manifest itself for you?
I guess my anger was directed mostly at the Lord. Uh, some at my husband. I think we were not grieving together or the same, which is not unusual. Men
Right.
grieve very differently from women, and we were doing that. We were also, uh, young, and so our faith needed to grow a lot, and it was not growing at the same pace. I would say. And so that was that part. But I also had some guilt that I couldn't save my baby, that I couldn't do something, that
Right.
maybe I did something wrong.
Right.
So yeah, so there was a lot, but the anger itself was mostly at the Lord, I would say, which is kind of shameful to say. But
And were you verbal with it or did you pull back from him? I know that when I experienced anger towards God, I isolated away from him
yeah,
because of my view of God. I thought, well, I can't tell him he's going to, bring down the gavel on my head or something. So it took me decades before I could actually admit to him, I'm mad at you.
yeah. It was a little bit of both. But I did have a great respect for God,
Mhm.
as sovereign and creator. But I also am kind of strong and too free with my words. So I also directed it to him, but I did also pull away. And in my deepest depression after the first miscarriage, I was just, I didn't want to get out of bed, and I didn't want anything to do with him. And uh, I didn't want people talking to me about him, and I didn't want to, even really hear from him or do anything that way. But I also remember, running through the woods and just falling on a path and just crying out, and just saying, just why, Lord, if this is how it's going to be, just leave me alone, and it's hard to say those things, look, now,
Right.
but it's what happened. And the Lord is, like I said, he's been so gracious.
Well, it's real and it's authentic and it's vulnerable. And our listeners who are going through something devastating right now need to hear it's okay. We have a God who's
Mhm.
big enough to handle it. You mentioned learning about God being sovereign, and there's a section from your book I wanted to read. It says, God exercises his sovereignty not based on what makes us comfortable but on what will edify and refine us. Just talk about that for a minute. How did you come to that place?
Mm. It was a long road to that place. It's in looking back, and it's in his continued presence despite my continued pushing away. And as I look back, I so clearly see it now, Michelle. I see how he used some of the most devastating things in my life to bring about such beauty
Yeah.
and hope. And I couldn't be the parent I am now. I couldn't be the caregiver for my daughter that I am now without what he allowed in my life. Would not have been as empathetic, caring. And, one of the things I had to learn to do with my daughter is accept her for the whole of who she is and not try to separate her out from her disabilities. And I couldn't have done that. It was this journey that, what the Lord brought me through that allowed me to do that. And looking toward the future is a scary place for us with our daughter, and that's something that I would be in a panic all the time if I didn't know and have seen his faithfulness through these years and through the struggles and the valleys.
And that's what I was reading about last night is in the book where you talk about what's her future going to be like when something happens to you and your husband. And if you didn't know that God was sovereign and that he's immutable and that he loves your daughter more than you do, that really, really would be a scary place. But the
Yeah.
reality is you do live in this world and so does she. So you have those questions.
Sure.
But I want to go now to how has God healed that wound, formed a sacred scar, or used these parenting experiences of yours for good?
Oh, in so many different ways. For one thing, he's allowed me to share my story, which I know can help others not feel so alone
Yeah.
in what they're experiencing. Um, Help them find the freedom to be able to express themselves to the Lord, which you said you could not do for so long, and to realize that He is a big God and He can do that. One of the ways was, like I said, He just, He healed me so that I can draw strength from what I've gone through and from Him, and accept my daughter and embrace my daughter for who she is. Excuse me, and even learn from her. And she has taught me so much, and she teaches me how to really love, and how to have compassion and empathy. And those are not things that were inherent, I think. I mean, I was a good person. I think everybody way back in my 20s would probably say I was a caring good person, but looking back at who that young wife was, I can say I was so selfish and so self-centered. And so the Lord used those wounds to just make me a much more beautiful person on
Mhm.
the inside.
Yeah.
I couldn't give that up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to walk through what I've walked through again, but I I can see so much beauty in what he's done through it, and how he's allowed me now to comfort others and reach out to others, and to hopefully make a difference and point them to him.
And because he's brought beauty on the inside, that is what spills out onto other people when you get bumped and
Mm-hmm.
pressed. There's
Mm-hmm.
another section of your book that I just love. It says, whatever difficult situation we face, the God of the universe is in charge of it. Whether large issues or seemingly small ones, he knows what's going on and he has a plan. As a sovereign, he is allowing the hardship in this season for a reason. We may not understand, but when we accept the mystery of the divine supreme being, believing he has control over all and is never caught off guard, we can choose trust over worry. We can look into our unexpected situation with expectancy for how he will use it in our lives, remembering he's guiding it all. And, that's one of the things that God just keeps bringing me back to is that when something difficult happens in my life, he has to keep reminding me it took me by surprise, but it didn't take God by
It didn't take
surprise.
him.
And he already knows how he's going to get me through it. But I would be curious from your perspective, what flipped the switch for you? So in other words, how did God
Mm.
help to show you that this painful trial actually had a redemptive purpose?
Honestly, the flip that switched was getting it's really interesting. It was really getting my eyes off of my anger of the redemption onto what I had to do for my daughter. It was actually giving me a purpose in
Mhm.
what I had to do. And
Mhm.
then honestly, taking that and showing me that I didn't have the strength for that either. So it was like he took me away from my anger by giving me a focus in my daughter.
Mhm.
And then he showed me that I couldn't fix her the way I wanted to fix her.
Mhm.
That honestly, made me put my eyes on him because I knew I didn't have the strength. My husband didn't have the strength. The doctors have no clue. It's only the Lord. He created her, he knows her. And so when that realization came to me that I had to surrender my strength, basically surrender her to him and all my expectations for her to him, I could then start seeing that he was there all along. This was all part of his plan. And he knew what it would take. He knew he had to get me through the anger part to get me to focus. Well, he needed to give me a different focus to get off the anger part. And then he could use me and he could mold me into more, a closer representative of Christ and someone who he could use to further his kingdom and to encourage others who are walking through difficulties. But it took what someone would say is another tragedy, which is so like the mystery of God, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's the redemptive nature of God.
Mhm.
And if
He's
we have,
mysterious.
and I'm grateful because if we had him all figured out, then I don't think we would need him.
Well, and would we want that kind of God? I
Right.
mean, if I could understand him, then why would I trust him?
Mhm.
Because I can't, and I think that was a big part of it. I had to know that there was someone out there, something out there, some God out there who was much more wise and more strong and um, that could handle the things I can't handle. But first, I had to realize I couldn't handle it.
But that is consistent with the scripture verse that when we are weak, he is strong.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes he's asking us to surrender our way of doing things and trying to do it in our own strength. He's not going to arm wrestle us for control. So it's
Yeah.
when we get to the place where we go, I really can't do this. I need
Yeah.
you to do it. He's like, yeah, just been waiting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that came about in a very clear way. I mean, I just kind of broke. I had, two little boys who were rambunctious in their own right, one with an arm that still needed care and we needed to try to figure that out. And then, I had this little girl and she was about 4. We went to a training program and it was a autistic training program, but she's not autistic, but we went there for some self kind of um, some help for her that she could become more interactive and actually we didn't even take her, we just went ourselves because that's what the program did and it was exactly what I needed and I just broke in front of the counselors. I mean, I just lost it and it was the first time I fully admitted I couldn't do this and it's exactly where he needed me.
Exactly. So if a listener is listening in on this conversation today and somehow they're resonating with your story or your situation, maybe they're a parent or a grandparent or wanting to be and have
Yeah.
experienced miscarriage or stillbirth or something along those lines, what hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
Oh, God is trustworthy. You can trust him. We can't understand him, but we can trust him. He's going to be there for you. He loves you. And just take the next minute if that's all you can do. Just hold on that next minute. He'll meet you in that minute. You'll be able to look back and you'll be able to see that he was faithful and he's not going to leave you.
I am so grateful for the lessons you've learned. I wish that you didn't have to go through all of that to experience it, but I love seeing the beauty that's come out of the trials that you've walked through.
Yeah.
So if listeners are interested in finding out more about you or your ministry or this great new book, sometimes I forget, what's the easiest way for them to find you?
I would say just jump on my website, juliesunne.com, and that's JULIESUNNE.com. And you can find all my social connections there. And I've got free gifts, and my book page is there as well. So I'd love to have you, and I'd love to journey with you. And we need each other, and we need to encourage each other.
We do. And I'm grateful you're a friend. Friends, we're going to put all the information about Julie in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. Julie, thanks for being a guest on the program and sharing out of your wounds and your pain, the sacred scars that God has brought to you. Friends, we all have pain. We all have wounds. But in the hands of a sovereign God, you can trust that He really will use it for good. So, if something in this episode has encouraged your heart, or you know a friend who is struggling and needs to know that there is hope, would you consider sharing this episode with them? And if you're at a point where you've gone through some pain and you're like, I just don't know. I don't know that God can use it or how God can use it or how I get past it. Consider picking up a copy of Sacred Scars, resting in God's promise that your past is not wasted. Friend, this has been another episode of your Hope-Filled Perspective, and it's my prayer for you that until we meet again next week, that you have a hope-filled week.